Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams. Daniel, good to see you.
How are you this morning, Dr. Paul?
Doing good. We have a little bit of good news today.
Good news, yeah.
Still some bad news out there.
Yeah.
We like the good news.
We do.
And we've talked a little bit about Wisconsin, what's going on up there, and it seems like there's a few fighters left up there. And you know, politics is so terrible and never works, but it just happens that the Democrats are in charge of writing rules and executive orders and destroying their state. At the same time, the more conservative, libertarian people are in charge of the legislature, and they didn't like this lockdown.
Yeah.
Well, not too many do it. The ones who are intimidated have to go along, you know, and they can't rock the boat. So they used a process which has been around a lot, but at times, sometimes it's flawed. But the legislative branch said, hey, why does the governor have so much power? Just to lock down, and they got token permission for a while from the legislative body. It ran out, so the legislative body felt put upon, so they didn't like the taking away of their authority. At the same time, they didn't like the lockdown, and they've also, I'm sure, sensed where the politics are, and the people are very supportive of getting things open, so they took it to court, and lo and behold, the judge ruled that the governor way overstepped his bounds, and they're being forced to open up, which I think is just great. I think it's such a shame that we have to go through this because, you know, if we were in a more libertarian society, you wouldn't have these kind of problems. People could just do what they wanted, and as long as they didn't hurt people or expose people to even their own problems or their own diseases. But this is a good news story, and they're moving in the right direction, and I think it's supported by the people. I think they had a little celebration. They celebrate and they go out and have a drink. It's just like the people around the world, I guess.
Yeah.
But anyway, there was big celebrations, and we'll have to see what happens. I just hope this persists.
Yeah, and then speaking of celebrations, let's have that first picture actually, because this was, I think, from the Washington Post. They were furious. Look at this, no masks at reopened bar. The bar is full. It really sort of reminds me, Dr. Paul, of the pictures I've seen from when they finally struck down prohibition. You know, when people went out and celebrated, they were tired of the tyranny. But you're right, the court, you know, ruled in favor of the legislature, which the legislature sued the governor, saying, okay, you had your emergency power, but you can't extend it unilaterally without the elected officials, the elected legislature, having a say in it. And the Wisconsin Supreme Court also agreed with the legislature that the unelected state health chief shouldn't have such power over the population. Right. Basically, sort of like Fauci, they kind of handed over policy to this unelected person. Well, Tony Evers is the governor there in Wisconsin, and he's apoplectic about the whole thing. He can't believe it. He said, we have no authority right now. It's been taken away. Of course, what it doesn't say is it's been taken away by the people in the form of their legislature. But here's what he said when the bars started opening and people started having a good time. They didn't put on their masks. They actually shook hands and acted like humans. He said, we're in the Wild West. There are no restrictions at all across the state of Wisconsin. So at this point in time, there is nothing that's compelling people to do anything other than having chaos here. So what he considers chaos, other people consider freedom.
And some people would throw in the word fun.
Yeah.
Freedom and fun may go together. But he also said, in order to cover himself, he's concerned about deaths. You know, he's not willing to look, none of them seem to be, that are all for all this close down. To see who's safe or unsafe, and he's assuming that everybody's going to buy into it, that if you allow people to go out to a bar, all of a sudden there's going to be a tremendous increase in deaths. But we have several other examples we'll probably mention today. It's not quite happening that way, and it's sort of happening like some people proposed that there would be a surge of people getting sick, like normal for most viruses and like flu. Matter of fact, not nearly as severe as influenza, but But the politicization of this is pretty amazing. I'm impressed with their ability to do this. I wonder if somebody had a strategy session last summer sometime. Say, well, we have it. There's a virus coming. What are we going to do to maximize our benefits from that? I know we have it every year, but this one's going to be different. And the propaganda machine went to work. And I was so disappointed today. If I read it correctly in my own newspaper here in Brazoria County, they said that they're going to change the way they count the illnesses. We're not going to bother and wait for a test or anything like that. If somebody has some symptoms, we're going to count them. So our numbers are probably going to go up. We've been talking, our numbers are pretty low here.
Yeah.
And, but they said that you don't have to have a test. So I'm hoping this all gets over because I hate criticizing the people that I work with.
Yeah, no, it seems fraudulent to me. You could just guess. Well, we'll guess that it's COVID, but in Wisconsin, okay, they had about 421 deaths as of yesterday from the COVID, which is it's not a good thing. It's a bad thing. But that really is just a little bit higher than just the 2018 flu season. So there's not a huge disparity yet for that. They shut down the entire state. Like everywhere else, the unemployment went through the roof. Businesses closed forever. You got a rush of suicides, depression, etc. But this opening, though celebrated by a lot of people, the Washington Post, of course, is not too thrilled. We have our second clip. This is in the same article. Here's how they editorialized in a news article about this. With Evers' statewide orders kaput, local health authorities scrambled to issue or extend citywide or county-wide stay-at-home orders, creating a hodgepodge of rules and regulations across the state that are bound to cause confusion, not to mention some traffic across county lines. It's a situation unlike any in the U.S. as the pandemic rages on. Of course, that language. And here's the final thing. This is how the Washington Post propagandizes, just like you were saying, Dr. Paul. But most of all, Evers feared that the court order would cause the thing he was trying to prevent. More death.
Right.
There they go. Propaganda.
There definitely are some similarities between what's going on now and the war against terrorism. Because at the beginning, most people knew what a terrorist was. They were supposed to know anyway, and it was a narrow definition. Of course, terrorism is just a tactics. But that morphed into anybody you didn't like. He's a terrorist, he's a jihadist, and then that painted the picture. And this is what they're doing now on this. If you don't obey the rules, they'd like to put you into that category that you're unpatriotic, you don't care about people dying, and yet they don't even have the evidence. It may well be that there are less. So the one you gave some numbers there about the number of people with coronavirus, but if we ever get to the bottom of it, I've seen some statistics show that one thing is that the flu numbers are way, way down. I don't think there's less influenza. I think what they do is they throw them all together.
Yeah.
Influenza can sound like, coronavirus. So somebody comes in, oh, yeah, it's the flu. Oh, yeah, coronavirus. And then that keeps the machine going. So fear is the driving element for politicians, whether it's the fear they associate with terrorism and fear with this. But it's one thing. It's to increase the power and influence and control by the state. The state grows. Wars the health of the state.
Yeah, and the real complaint that they have in Wisconsin, of course, the control freaks, the power freaks, as our friend Bob Wenzel would say, the fear they have is that there's not one single, one-size-fits-all overarching system that would keep someone in, say, a rural area with very, very little chance of contracting the virus in the same category as someone from Madison or from the big city. And that's the big problem. They're complaining that some counties will stay closed, some will open. It'll cause chaos, it'll cause confusion. Well, what it's going to do actually is create a kind of situation where there's competition. And if you want to stay home, if you want to stay locked down, you stay in the county, you stay where you are, where it's locked down. But if you want to go out and you want to start living your life, if you have a very low risk and you've assessed that risk and you want to get back to work because you're going bankrupt, well, then you have the opportunity to do that. And that's really the beauty of the whole thing.
And it's not difficult to find some very, very good statements, and it comes from their heart and their logic and common sense, and not from some distant theoretical philosophy. But it does, I found one here that comes from one of the individuals that have been relieved or arguing the case about this shutdown. And it's very libertarian. I think libertarianism is very natural. Just leave me alone. But he stated it. He didn't write a whole booklet on it or do anything like that. He very simply said, if the people want to quarantine, quarantine. If you don't want to quarantine, don't quarantine. Go out and do what you normally do. Wow, that's complicated, isn't it? And of course, we always put all of that into the non-aggression principle, is that, yeah, you do what you want, but there is the one rule: you don't hurt anybody. And then they would come back and say, aha, going out, you're going to kill people. So that's how they try to have it on both sides. But I don't think the statistics are going to hold up. They can't say that because there's a risk in nature and there are infections, then therefore you have to give up the principles of libertarianism. But there's been quite a few, because we're dealing with self-reliance and self-respect, as the barber was, the case with the barber, And I guess the governor of Michigan got a little bit annoyed because there were too many protesters, and she didn't like that, and she said, "Okay, if you're going to do that," she didn't say it, but her tone and her words were, "I'm going to punish you. We're going to keep them on longer. We're going to make sure that rules are there." And I thought that was about the ugliest thing you could hear. I mean, it's all bad, the authoritarians. But this whole idea that if you disobey my orders, collectively, you're all going to be punished, and I'm going to keep writing these orders. But I think there's going to be a growing number of people, objecting to this. And I'm sure, this issue is going to be the issue of November. And I think if the real issue is violence and freedom and making your own decisions, I think things will have to be ironed out by November with how beneficial were these controls and how much harm have they come, because we've sure heard a lot of people who've been suffering from these, or you wouldn't have this celebration that we see now. People are celebrating. I mean, it's not like they got some free gift. All they got was a return of what was theirs to begin with.
Stolen,
people think that it does come from the government. That governor thinks freedom comes from her. No, it doesn't. But still, when it's been taken away from you and there is a return, there's reason to rejoice about it. And I think we're starting to see that.
Yeah, I think so too. And what really terrifies them the most, what they can't stand, of course, early on when we started talking about the states that didn't lock down so tight, like South Dakota, the governor down there, they had, I think, about 16 deaths, less than 20 deaths, and they can't stand that. But we have our next clip, and this is what is driving them crazy, because the states that are opening up, of course, you're supposed to see a huge spike. Look at this: coronavirus cases in Georgia and Florida continue to decline despite business openings. This is what's driving them. They're losing control. Even the governor of Wisconsin said, we're losing control. And if you go to the next one, though, you brought up the governor of Michigan, who is a tyrant to beat all tyrants. Here's what she did to your barber, Dr. Paul. Heartbreaking. Michigan Governor Whitmer strips 77-year-old barber of his license without due process. The barber that said, I'm going to keep my shop open, she just ripped his license away.
And she says he's the violent person.
Yeah.
He's committing violence because he's disobeying her orders, and he's the evil one. He doesn't obey the law. And look at what she does that. But that's the case. Those are the things that we hear about, how many people have suffered. And there is that group out there. And some people argue, well, it sounds pretty logical. If they're going to pay you $20 not to work, and you say, well, hey, you want your job back? I'll give you $12 an hour. It's a messy situation, which shouldn't occur. But for her to do this, she is using violence against people, and she's taking their life away from them. They're taking their liberty. But see, and I've said it so many times, we have a right to our life and our liberty. But we also have to have the right to the fruits of our labor.
Yeah.
And I think that's a way to appeal to some of the progressives. If you're talking about, freedom of action in social issues and religious issues and freedom of speech, why can't we apply that to your life? Your life, you own your own life. So if you're able to produce something of value, it should belong to you. It shouldn't belong to the state for these monsters to come along and say, oh, well, we really own your life.
Yeah.
And if you behave, we're going to return a little bit of it to you. And hopefully there'll be more objection to this because it just doesn't make any sense. And I think their program is based on evil and violence because they always have the gun. And then they, taking his license away from him. Of course, the libertarian answer to that is we have too many licenses anyway. We don't need them because it's used as a weapon.
As we
So
see,
it's a real shame, and let's hope they come to their senses up there and let the man work. He's 77. They said that's old. Well, I don't think it's very old.
Yeah.
I think he should be energetic. And I saw somebody the other day. There was a parade for somebody who was 96.
Yeah.
She looked really good, and I was wondering the parade was going by, but I think they were following all the rules with masks. I mean, here she is, 96 years old, and she has to celebrate with people wearing masks.
It is a shame. But Whitmer and Michigan should be nervous by the Wisconsin thing because there are similarities. And I don't know the exact makeup of the Supreme Court and of the legislature in Michigan. I do know that it's Republican dominated for whatever that's worth. But the situation is similar. Whitmer declared a 28-day state of emergency according to the Constitution of Michigan. When those 28 days, and her lockdown, as you know, got more and more severe as she got more and more power crazed. When those 28 days were over, she said, I want to keep all my powers under this Emergency Act. And the legislature said, no, you can't do that. We won't vote for it. We won't vote to let you have it. And so that's when they sued. She said, I don't care. I'll do it anyway. So they took it to the Supreme Court in Michigan, to the court in Michigan. And those oral arguments will be held on Friday, this Friday, tomorrow, I guess it is. She's already made her response to it. She says, they're just mad. She shrugged it off. It's just a power grab. But it is interesting without going into too many of the details because the courts there are going to have to decide whether the 1976 Emergency Management Act supersedes the 48 Emergency Powers Act. The 76 Act requires the legislature to sign off on the extension, which does make sense in a way when you have someone who can rule by decree unilaterally without any checks or balances on their power. You can see what it does to someone. It seems to go to your head and make you a little bit kooky, like she sounds. But it'll be interesting to see if this dam starts breaking, if we see like the numbers coming in that are so low, going down so much with the opening states, they're not getting that spike that really sickeningly enough a lot of them are hoping for, then we might start seeing this dam break.
What will be exposed is they're lying.
Yeah.
They lie one thing. It's not just errors. They lie for their own purpose. And the word hypocrite is a good term to use for most politicians, at all degrees. But the hypocrisy of it all is just plain out lying, and it's notorious in Washington, D.C. and by the bureaucrats or who anybody has power. But what about Bob Wenzel exposed this about the individual that had the directives and participated in saying, okay, the nursing homes ought to be open, and even if they're positive, we'll put them in because we got to quarantine them. Doing exactly the opposite, a death sentence, and it proved out they killed people.
Yeah.
And they put them in there, but that's one thing. Let's say give her a break, and she just didn't have. She doesn't have a good understanding. Exposed to the wrong economics and all. But the hypocrisy of it, the exposure of this, in the meantime, she made sure she took her mother out of the nursing home and put her someplace else. So that is, and I think that is going to play into the things you were referring to. When this thing breaks, this may be much better than even what we ever dreamed or hoped for, that there'll be more positive things coming from this. And I think it's going to really happen when they realize that they can't depend on the government. And of course, I've talked about the government, the moral and the financial bankruptcy of this country. Well, morally, everybody seems to understand that pretty well, but the financial is still there because Pelosi right now, she's working closely with the Republicans. Cautiously, they are going to talk about $2 more trillion and also infrastructure, $1 trillion. But that's going to quit. And that's when people are going to say, hey, they can't, what do they do? They guarantee me $15 an hour. I'm getting $15 an hour, but everything costs about 10 times more, and there's a government's not working so well. So this is the reason that we should prepare for the at least the philosophic collapse of what's happening. You know, hardcore communism had an obvious collapse in 1989, but unfortunately the authoritarianism was well bred into interventionism, which we had, and other types of more modest, socialistic program. But the principle is the same, so they have to look at this as a principle of saying people should be able to take care of themselves, and governments can't do it. No more so blind dedication to the politician. And this is what we're talking about. They're not doing a very good job.
Yeah.
And I know it's the Republicans. Yeah. It's that Trump's, he's crazy, so we have to get rid of him. This sort of thing. Yeah. And then the other side was, well, we keep hearing more and more things about Obama, and I don't think he was a saint. Yeah. and so why do people put trust in it? We just have to change them around. But do they ever change parties? No, we have the one party, the Republicans and Democrats, and the people don't realize that. They hone in on the personalities, so therefore they can support people with superficial reasons and go after people for superficial reasons. And I think the opportunity is arriving because government is failing, and it's going to be worse than ever before because it's global. They always wanted globalism. We had globalism, but it was fake. And now this globalism is going to be, people are going to realize, why do people believe in this stuff? Yeah. Oh, well, we'll take care of it. I guess they're wearing masks all around the world these days, aren't they? Yeah. I think they're trying to hide from the reality of life. Give me a mask and I won't have to think about it. And of course, some people put their mask up over their eyes.
Yeah. Well, it really is hard to ignore this increasing feeling that there's a political component to these shutdowns. And, we sort of have the leeway to say this. We're not supporters of Trump or opponents of Trump. We're looking at the landscape. There was a good piece, I'm sure you read it, by Tom DiLorenzo on Lou Rockwell's site. And he brings up this political component. And first of all, we have to see, as you sort of hinted at a minute ago, the Russiagate narrative has now fully collapsed. We have a good piece on the Ron Paul Institute website from Ray McGovern about how the second leg has collapsed of the Russiagate narrative. The idea that the DNC was hacked by Russia, that has all fallen apart now when testimonies come out. So the Russiagate coup attempt against the president has completely fallen apart. And DiLorenzo is looking at it, thinking about in Democrat-led states, the economy is being crushed by Democratic governors, depriving Trump of his ability to say, as he always likes to say, this is the best market we've ever had, even though as you know, and as most people who follow the Austrian school know, it's a chimera, it's fake, but nevertheless, that was his campaign platform. Unemployment, historic lows, growth, minorities have the best growth. So they're denying him of that, and also denying him, this is what DiLorenzo, I hadn't thought about this until today, but denying one of the real strengths that Trump had in the 2016 campaign was these mass rallies, 70,000 people. And he knows, whatever you think about it, he knows how to work a crowd and work people up. And he did and does do that, and now he won't be able to do that. He'll be deprived of that ability. So it's hard to ignore the political component to the whole thing. And I do want to finish with just the final thing, which is a picture of this Levine creature. Let's have a look. This really is sort of the face of evil in a way, and I'm not making fun of the person's looks necessarily, but this is the sort of the mentality that the communists and the totalitarians have always had. Hey, the rules don't apply to me. They apply to you, you low people, you nobodies. She took her mother out of the rest home just before she ruled that they have to accept the COVID-19 patients, which have killed thousands of people. She knew it was coming. She did it anyway. This is from Bob Wenzel's Target Liberty website, who's doing a great job anyway. So this really is the mentality of authoritarians. Dr. Paul?
That's for sure. The lockdown could have been planned. A lot of people believe that. And you mentioned, Daniel, how successful Trump has been with his crowds, and there's no doubt. And some people said they made their prediction that he would win the last election because there's not very many people who can get these tens or hundreds of thousands of people, and even did that for the next 3 years as a president. And I said, he probably has talked directly with more people than any politician or all the politicians put together. I mean, it wasn't like 5 and 10,000 people. I mean, many, many. And some people's theory is that this whole thing of lockdown, you know, it's turned out to be a direct attack on his best weapon, that is talking directly with the people. He can't do that, and if he does, then they flip it around and say he wants to kill people. So this it's a big mess, but ultimately, people have to rely on ideas, and ideas have consequences. And as I mentioned before, things are coming unglued, and we're going to have to change our way. Every time a monetary system collapses, they have to redo the monetary system. And traditionally, over hundreds, if not thousands of years, they resorted to using the metals to give confidence back, because the improprieties with the monetary issue and the fake money and inflation, that's been around a long time, and that is what drove this market. So coronavirus is significant, and it's a distortion, and it's used to destroy our liberties. But really, the big bubble and the big bust has to do with finances, and it has to do with central banking. And right now, you know, it's always the same old story from the central banker, and Powell is saying to the Congress, well, yeah, I need a little help now. Could you increase your spending? I'll monetize it for you. Don't worry about that. But that's been going on now. I mean, there's a limit, and that's what I'm saying. We're getting to that limit, and the central banking is under a sharp attack by people not in our circles, just because they have done such a lousy job. They can't manage this with negative interest rates and pretend that they're working and understanding what capital is all about. How do you allocate capital unless you have a total authoritarian government? You might as well just have the system of communism and socialism if you're not going to have the system of saving and market rates of interest. But that's where we are. It's changing, and we better be ready. And there are quite a few people out there doing the work to propose what kind of economic policies we should follow. And also, for me, it's understanding the basic principle of personal liberty and personal responsibility, because the people know what to do and they know how to work it out imperfectly. But why should we put so many imperfect people in our government and let them dictate to us? And that is what we've been talking about at all levels. It used to be, well, it's just, our government, our federal government, and then it became international government, UN and IMF and all these things. And now we even have to worry about our own cities and our state government. It's authoritarianism. So authoritarianism has to go if you want to live in a free society. And our goal here at the Liberty Report is to promote the cause of liberty, because we are convinced that if you care about peace and prosperity, you have to go with the issue of promoting personal liberty. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today. Please come back soon.